Today on Fear and Greed, the federal government promises to back collapsed airline Regional Express as new figures show domestic airfares are rising. Both business and consumer sentiment finally starts to pick up, and the Bitcoin boom keeps giving. Plus, there is more on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's conversation with US President-elect Donald Trump and the chair of Coles fighting back. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It's Wednesday, the 13th of November, 2024. I'm Adam Lang, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Adam.
Sean, the main story this morning, the federal government has pledged $80 million to keep Rex flying regional routes, as new figures show domestic airfares have risen sharply since Regional Express stopped flying major city routes.
That's right. First up, the government has provided $80 million to Regional Express. That means workers will get paid. Flights will keep going until June next year. That's after the federal election. Notable. The feds will continue to guarantee seats for passengers who purchase tickets with Rex. It's a sore point for the feds because Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been criticised as being too close to Alan Joyce. The fact that Regional Express has collapsed works into that particular argument from the opposition. All this comes as the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission report shows that since the end of July, prices on big city routes, think Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, are up 13.3%. That's just in 3 months, even though fuel costs are about 40% lower than where they were a year ago. The report says domestic airline passengers face less choice and higher airfares because of the demise of Rex, particularly their services between metropolitan cities. September's a busy time because of sporting events and things, but the watchdog said most of the fare hikes reflect lesser competition. Hardest hit routes, Adelaide to Melbourne, up 95% in that 3 months. Melbourne to the Gold Coast, 70%. Canberra to Melbourne, 54%. It also looked at cancellation stats. They got as high as 3% in July, but back down to 2%. So we better give the carriers a pat on the back for that one. On-time arrival is creeping up. It's about 75.5%. The ACCC warned that it may be some time before another airline emerges on busy city routes. And for the time being, Qantas and Virgin now have 98% market share. Without competition, it's hard to see prices coming down.
Sean, the ACCC report is part of the government's push to better monitor what's going on. Was it a little surprising yesterday hearing the response from Qantas?
Well, yes, they came out fighting, and maybe they have a point, but I don't know that too many people were listening. Qantas said that the data didn't reflect average airfares being paid. Now, the ACCC never said that it did reflect average airfares being paid. They just take a 3-week period ahead of a set date. In this instance, it was the 3 weeks up until October 31, and has a snapshot of lowest fares available in those 3 weeks. Now, the thing that Qantas is arguing is that 3 weeks, including a time when Melbourne hosted Coldplay. So demand was high. The cheaper flights had been bought early. So people chasing flights to go to Melbourne and see Coldplay were paying higher prices. They actually said, or Qantas said, that the increase over the past 12 months is more broadly in line with inflation rather than the numbers that the ACCC is throwing out there.
Sean, is it like the ACCC being a mystery shopper on airfares?
Well, it is a bit, isn't it? I mean, they're putting out this report regularly now, and so we're getting far, far greater scrutiny on the airlines. But it just sounded yesterday as if Qantas was just like, oh, come on, guys, that's not fair. You've picked 3 weeks when prices were high. Well,
did you have to pick that 3 weeks?
Yeah, that's right. When would you prefer us to look at the prices? Yeah, anyway.
Sean, moving on. Australians are feeling just a little bit more upbeat with consumer sentiment hitting its highest level since the Reserve Bank started hiking interest rates.
Yes, so finally some good news. The Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Sentiment Survey was released yesterday. Just looks like people aren't worried about rate rises so much anymore, and the outlook for their income on the back of strong labour market is pretty good. The sentiment is up to 84.6. Now, that's still in negative territory. There are more pessimists than optimists out there, but it's up 21% from its low point in late 2022. That is good news. Very good sign for retailers with Christmas coming up, for example. Some of the readings, there's lots of data that goes into this Westpac Melbourne Institute reading. Some of the forward-looking factors, like the economic outlook, family finances, are as good as they've been since COVID, and that is very much thanks to the idea that people think inflation is falling and stronger. The labour market remains strong. Sentiment around housing has also picked up. It's not all perfect. So one of the particular readings which economists love, the question is now a good time to buy a major household item? And people think that's a really good read into what people think are going to happen. You're only going to buy something major if you think times are going to be okay in the next few months. Well, that's still pretty low. So it's not universally good by any stretch of the imagination, but at least more positive signs than we've seen for a couple of years.
And Sean, on the business side, it feels like we've got to measure that they're more upbeat as well.
Yes, so according to the National Australia Bank business surveys, which were released yesterday, business conditions are up just a touch. They're probably still trending down, the conditions. Business confidence, though, that those readings jumped sharply. Inflation measures within the National Australia Bank survey shows that price rises are starting to be contained. The employment reading in the survey is weakening somewhat, though it's still positive, but you'd expect the employment reading to be weakening because obviously the economy is coming off somewhat. The bottom line in all this, consumers and businesses are just a little bit more confident than they've been for a while, Adam.
I'll take that. That's good news, Sean. And immediately after the show, we want everyone to stay listening for your chat with Grant Hackett AO. He's the CEO of Generation Life.
He is. One-time swimmer. Quite decent at that. Now running, he's been worked at Bankers Trust, or BT it's called, and he worked at Westpac. He's now at Generation Life. They've put out a report, Not Tomorrow's Problem. Basically, it's about the financial challenges faced by different demographic groups. And it's really fascinating to talk to Grant about what the report shows.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. United States President-elect Donald Trump last week told Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that Australia and the US would enjoy a, quote, perfect relationship. I can almost hear it in his tones, Sean.
Yes, so the quote from Anthony Albanese was, he described the relationship we would have as a perfect friendship, and I am very confident the relationship between Australia and the United States will continue to be going very strong. Let's hope so. Anthony Albanese has never actually met Donald Trump. Now, the opposition is calling on the Prime Minister to head to the US. He's flying to Peru today for the APEC summit. Then he's going to Brazil for a G20 conference. The opposition is suggesting he should go home via the States, Mar-a-Lago perhaps, to actually meet Donald Trump, all about making sure that those 10 to 20% tariffs aren't imposed on Aussie exports. Mr. Albanese has rejected that, but it is interesting that this is the first time we found out exactly what Albanese and Trump talked to each other about, and the fact that Donald Trump called it a perfect relationship augurs well for the next administration.
We can have Air Force watch over the weekend, Sean, to see if he actually goes to the US.
Yeah, I wonder.
Back home, Sean, Coles held its annual general meeting yesterday and Chair James Graham said it is disappointing to see cost of living issues being politicised.
Really? What do you expect?
Is it?
Oh, we just had a US federal election, which was all about the cost of living.
Change of government in the UK, a few others around the world.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite a funny thing to say. Sorry, Mr. Graham, I'm sure you're a good fella. He said Coles is sensitive to the economic health of households. He highlighted how closely supermarkets and governments worked together during COVID and the bushfire and flood periods. And there's no doubt the supermarkets did an amazing job, particularly during COVID and in some regions of Australia during the floods and bushfires, worked closely with the government. He just sort of lamented that that's not happening anymore. Of course, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has taken Coles and Woolies to court, alleging them of producing sham discounts. Mr. Graham said Coles was committed to ensuring it does the right thing. He did have some pretty interesting stats. He said the basket of goods in Australia over the last 5 years is up about 24%. That's actually below New Zealand, Canada, the UK and the US, and the OECD average is 39%. So his point was that actually the big supermarkets here are doing okay.
Yeah, and probably a reflection too that we're not bad at producing some of our own food.
Yeah, I think so. I have to think about that one. That got me on the run there, Adam.
I'll put it to ask, fear and greed and see how we go.
Yes.
Sean, the local market started poorly, dropping sharply in the beginning, but by the end of the day, it hadn't actually moved that much.
No, so the S&P ASX 200 closed down just a touch, 0.1% to 8,256 points. Pretty tough day for the gold miners. The price of the precious metal has come off in recent days following the election last week in the US. Iron ore prices are also slipping. They're back around $100 a tonne. That's putting pressure on the big miners, BHP, Rio, Fortescue Metals. Yesterday, the tech stocks probably were among the best, I would say. One interesting performer was NIB. It said mounting losses in its New Zealand business means earnings will be down as much as 10% this year. It had a shocking half-year report which came out in August. It wiped about 20% off its share price. Yesterday, it fell about 3%, though it did clamber back to finish flat.
Sean, in legal news, one of Australia's largest law firms, Herbert Smith Freehills, is merging with a New York firm, becoming the first local partnership to have significant operations in the US of A.
So what I love about legal stories, yeah, not much. But we should cover accountants and lawyers more than we do, and that is a failing of mine.
Some of our finest listeners are lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's the names that I love. So the firm see, I'm calling it Freehills. It hasn't been Freehills since about 2012 when it merged with Herbert Smith. HSF, I'm still going to call it Freehills. Now, Herbert Smith Freehills,
yep.
It wants to merge with a group in the US called Kramer, Levin, Naftalis and Frankel. Kramer, Levin, Naftalis and Frankel.
Gosh, that rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It sure does. If they come together and 75% of partners approve it, it'll become Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer. God, it's beautiful, isn't it? Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer, HSFK. It'll add about 120 partners to the group. Herbert Smith Freehills is one of Australia's oldest law firms. Its actually origins trace back to about the 1850s, 1853. Wow. It's grown to have 500 partners around the world, 168 in Australia. Bit of a trend, the merging with global firms. Allen and Overy earlier in the year, about May, agreed to merge with an American firm, Shearman and Sterling. Ashurst is looking for opportunities as well, according to the Fin Review.
Wow. Sean, gaming manufacturer Aristocrat Leisure has sold its mobile gaming business, Plarium Global, for $1.2 billion.
It wants to get back to its knitting and focus on poker machines and casino-style online games. It sold what's known as Raid Shadow Legends. One of your favourites?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sean. I haven't put any time into that one.
No. It sold that one to a Swedish group. It's written down the value of its other free-to-play mobile games business. I've never quite worked out how free-to-play mobile games businesses make money. I presume it's product placement and stuff like that. Yeah, I presume, but I don't know. Anyway, it's just no longer a focus of the group. It wants to get back to its DNA, which is in that regulated gaming machines. It bought into social gaming back in 2017, spending about $1.5 billion. It was worried that games like Queen of the Nile and Five Dragons were slowing. Now, Adam,
yes,
and you've got to be honest. I don't play poker machines at all.
It's not my strong suit, Sean.
No, I'm not anti it. I'm not none of those things. I'm just like, it's just not my thing. Queen of the Nile. The funny thing about that, when I read Queen of the Nile, I've actually heard of it. Five Dragons. I've heard of that one too. Oh, it's really sad.
I thought they were pinball machines.
No. Anyway, apparently Queen of the Nile and Five Dragons aren't doing so poorly anymore. We'll find out more today. Aristocrat Leisure's financial results are out. It's an incredible company, Aristocrat Leisure. It's actually, its share price is up sort of 55-60% for the year. So it's done pretty well.
Great year for them. Sean, uranium miner Paladin Energy has cut its forecast for production, saying its previous estimates were a bit ambitious.
A bit ambitious? Yeah, investors like that one. Its share price fell 28% on the news, easily the worst of the top 200. It cut its guidance from 4 to 4.5 million pounds of uranium a year to 3 to 3.6 million pounds of uranium.
Oh, that's a bit of a drop.
Yeah, a few things there. So what's that? 4.25 down to 3.3. So that's huge. It's, quarter less.
Yeah.
But what I really liked, and I hadn't really ever thought of it, they talk about pounds of uranium. Not that many things are imperial.
I prefer kilos.
I do too. Then I was thinking about like acres. The acres of land? That's imperials. And hectares is...
Hectares, acres,
so hectares is metric. acres. So then I started thinking about what other imperial measurements are there.
Did you go down a rabbit hole, Sean?
Yeah, totally. Is a barrel of oil imperial or metric? No, I don't think it's either.
Well, it's gallons, isn't it? So it's imperial, isn't it?
No, but they measure, well, gallons is imperial, but they measure it in barrels of oil, like the universal measurement.
I just pictured them
but
all.
uranium's in pounds.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, we are going down a rabbit hole. Back to Paladin Energy. It's got problems in Namibia. It owns something called the Langer Heinrich mine. It's got a 75% stake. The other 25% stake is owned by a crowd called China National Nuclear Corp. Problems there. Also, Paladin's trying to buy a Toronto-listed company called Fission Uranium, beautifully named Fission Uranium. The Canadian government ain't real happy about that. Now, one of the owners of Fission Uranium is a Chinese firm. Also, the fact that China National Nuclear Corp owns 25% of this big mine in Namibia is kind of worrying the Canadian government. That China National Nuclear Corp also has lent money to Paladin, so there's a bit going on there. Anyway, plenty going on at Paladin, but yesterday its share price was down 28. Actually, now that I've just checked the numbers here, it's 29%. It's like 28.6 or something. It's 29%. Not good.
Big day. In international news, Sean, this is a big question. How far can Bitcoin run? It's gone through the US $78,000 mark, then US $82,000 and $86,000 a unit. Now it's within reach of US $90,000 a unit. Could it break 100?
Yeah, well, since last week's election, Bitcoin is up 30%. The cryptocurrency's
Incredible.
Its market capitalization, the total value of Bitcoin out there, is now over $3 trillion US dollars. Yesterday morning, it jumped 10% to a fresh high of just under 90,000 US dollars. ETF investing is leading the way. It's more than doubled in 2024. That's the value of Bitcoin. Pundits now reckon 100,000 US dollars a unit is within reach. Crazy prices on an asset which is still not universally recommended or recognized. All about Donald Trump winning power and Congress full of pro-crypto politicians. It looks like the Republicans will end up with the Senate and the House of Reps, so they'll have a clean sweep.
Staying in the USA, Sean, President-elect Donald Trump has picked two men with track records of harshly criticising China for key positions in his new administration.
Yes, so if you hope that the world's two big superpowers might get together and become chummy in the next administration...
No,
I don't think so. Bloomberg's reporting that Senator Marco Rubio, who has taken an aggressive stance on China's emergence as an economic power and twice been hit with sanctions by Beijing, is expected to be named Secretary of State. Well, that'll go down well, won't it? Then Representative Mike Waltz, who views China as a greater threat to the US than any other nation, is in line to be the National Security Advisor.
Right.
The pick of Waltz would elevate a former Army Green Beret and combat veteran of Afghanistan to a role coordinating foreign policy in the West Wing and briefing the president on global crises. Also, I just have to add something to a story from yesterday. Yesterday we talked about Donald Trump speaking to Vladimir Putin. We're having a bit of a laugh.
Yes.
Blood, Don, how you going? All that stuff. Yeah, well, that was Washington Post was reporting that. We said that. The Kremlin have come out and denied it happened. Said they haven't spoken.
Right.
So who knows what's true.
Well, we'll stay tuned.
Indeed.
Sean, a deal to launch multi-billion-dollar carbon markets governed by the United Nations rules on emissions has been agreed at the COP29 climate summit as countries attempt to show the fight against climate change will persist despite last week's election of Donald Trump.
In the first symbolic negotiating breakthrough, the COP29 presidency pushed successfully for countries to adopt rules on a global market for trading instruments representing carbon emissions, according to the Financial Times. Carbon trading could help raise some of the cash that developing countries will need to adapt to the effects of climate change while helping big polluters cut their emissions. It's a win for COP29 host Azerbaijan ahead of tough negotiations on other types of finance. Not everyone was happy, some saying the speedy agreement had bypassed a proper scrutiny. It came as US President Joe Biden's top climate advisor conceded action to limit global warming, I quote, may be put on the back burner, end quote.
Interesting choice of words.
Yeah. I like that. After Trump's return to the White House, he did seek to reassure the world, though, that this would slow, but not stop, the shift away from fossil fuels.
Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Grant Hackett from Generation Life. And at around 11 a.m. this morning, get ready to receive our weekly newsletter, your missive to our audience. And if you haven't done so yet, head to our website, fearandgreed.com.au, and sign up, and you'll receive it every Wednesday morning. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, I didn't call you Michael. Thank you, Adam. You've just put me under the gun at 11 a.m. There's not a chance I'm going to get that newsletter out before 12. But that's all right. That's all right. I like the pressure.
My apologies, Sean.
Thank you, Adam.
It's a new deadline. Surprise. It's Wednesday, the 13th of November, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook, and have a great day.